The clerical aspect, just before we get to the history of this, just the clerical aspect of these Founding Fathers projects is hard to convey. In these days of computers and databases and spreadsheets and internet searches, it's hard to understand what it looked like. Let me see if I have, okay, this didn't come out too great, but these are envelopes. We had 19,000 of these envelopes lining the walls of the office. Each time a document was acquired, and we would have photocopies of the original, and it was typed, and it was proofed, and a copy of the transcription was put in the envelope with the original, and the original typescript was put in a notebook for editing, and every one of those envelopes carries a history of the project. To or from whomever, the date, the place it was acquired from, its accession number in our records. We also had a collection at the very end of odds and ends of Hamilton's that we couldn't place, undated miscellaneous documents. We went through those occasionally, hoping that as we moved through the dated documents, we would be able to place something. We also had a collection of what we called neither nors. Those were letters neither by nor to Hamilton, but relevant to him. This would include such things as the commentaries by his seconds on the duel, reflections on him, early pieces relating to his mother in St. Croix. Our first priority with these accurate transcripts, and let me see, okay, this is the kind of thing we were dealing with, and some of these documents we have, as you'll see later, were not even these kinds of Xeroxes. They were the old white on blacks that were even harder to read. This is Hamilton's opinion on the constitutionality of the first bank. You can see what we were dealing with. The typescripts were done to show all the interlineations, all the changes. Okay, we didn't just print the final. We printed it as it appears. And if you look further in the book when it appears, you see the hands in the margin with the fingers pointing. These are all part of the original document. Some of this does not show up in the online version. It's missing some of these extra little annotations. All of this typesetting was done by hand. A company in upstate New York named, those days, Maple Vale. Many years later, when I was involved in different work, I met a salesman from Maple Vale, and we started to talk about our histories, and it turned out he had been one of the typesetters on this project. So, but here you see the complexity of all of this. Now, each time we did this, it was proofed again. So it was acquired, it was, typescript was created, it was proofed. Then before we went to the printer, it was proofed again. And then when it came back from the printer, because everything had been set character for character all over again, we proofed it yet again. If a document was damaged, this one, if you look on your right, that's Hamilton's last letter to his wife before the duel. You can see that it's mutilated in places we can't read it. So what we did was we turned to the document that's on your left, on your right, I'm sorry, which is John Church Hamilton, his son's transcript, which was clearly made at a time when you could read the original. And by putting the two together, we were able to produce a correct typescript. This is very painstaking work. All annotations were from primary sources with introductory notes to major topics and explanations of any relevant conflicting interpretations by historians. There are more than 40 such notes running through the papers, most notably on Hamilton's fiscal proposals, the Reynolds affair, the duel, the farewell address, anything that had such a heavy correspondence and such a heavy importance that we felt to scatter it throughout the volumes would have made it meaningless. So we gathered everything in an introductory note, and then we would refer you back to it when subsequent letters discussed that subject. In 1980, Syrett was the first recipient of the Jameson Prize for outstanding achievement in the editing of historical sources. For him, it was the pinnacle of his career. As Hamilton valued the opinion of his contemporaries, Syrett valued the opinion of his fellow historians. Now this material's online, but efficiency has its price. You can access and use it easily, but you don't get a visual sense of what was really involved. I mean, seeing all these 19,000 documents spread out across a wall really gave you a sense of what we were doing. The ability to target searches online means you don't read a lot of the surrounding material, which is something we were forced to do. If I wanted to find something in Washington's correspondence that related to something Hamilton was discussing, I had to read all of Washington's correspondence for that day to find it. I couldn't just do a search. And in doing that, I sometimes found other things that were interesting or other things that we needed. Nowadays, you won't have that kind of serendipitous find. Looking at originals, transcribing them, touching original documents, it's a whole different feeling. I understand it's more efficient online, but if you have a chance to actually go to the library and go through this material, it really gives you a different feel for the period. Our mandate was to edit, not to editorialize. We were charged with providing accurate transcripts and annotations that interpretive historians could then use. We made research convenient and nonpartisan. Ours was not to judge, not to take sides, to present the evidence from which scholars could then draw their own conclusions. Syrett was firm about not using judgmental adjectives in our writing. It has a very journalistic style. This differs from biographical research and writing. We didn't pick and choose what to annotate. We had to go through his letters day by day, one by one. Every letter was important. Every letter needed to be explained. We couldn't push something aside as irrelevant. I remember a famous letter in which somebody recommended Mr. John Smith of New York for a position. And I just looked. And I thought, what are we going to do with this? But it was a federal appointment, and God bless George Washington's secretaries, Bartholomew Dandridge and Tobias Lear, who kept an executive diary. And sure enough, he was recommended for an appointment, and John Smith was identified in that document. But we couldn't let anything go. So it's very different. To annotate a letter between Hamilton and Washington on a topic of international importance, we had to go through both their correspondence for the day, the correspondence of everybody mentioned in the letter, all the newspaper articles, the State Department documents, and then try to piece it all together. Hamilton was remarkably accurate in his writing. He forgot nothing, and he made very few mistakes. But by the time you had gone through a whole day at work, you had walked through the day with Hamilton. You knew what happened. You knew what occupied his time, what he thought about events and even more mundane issues relating to family, what was written about them, who he corresponded with. You treated every document as if it was evidence in a court case. You corroborated, you confirmed, you looked for eyewitnesses. Basically, you shadowed them. And by the time you left work, their day was yours. Every once in a while, Syrett would look at me and say, let's get out of here. We would go out, he with his his difficult hip, he had a bad hip, and at one time I had a broken arm, and it had snowed. And the two of us hobbled across Broadway to Chock-full of Nuts on 116th Street. And he said, look around. There's a car, there's a bus, there's a newspaper. George Washington is not our president. Because there really were days when I thought he was, and given that Nixon was close to impeachment, it might not have been a bad thing, but you very much became part of it. If you look now, this is 4 pages from the printed book. This is a letter from Rufus King to Hamilton on March 8th, 1797. King was our minister to England. It's a short letter. Mostly it's about the low reserves in the Bank of England with a postscript on U.S. relations with Central Europe and Algeria. This is what we printed, but this, if you look, are our notes. This was all done by hand. And if you look at it, you would see that by the time we edited this short letter, we had consulted the London Gazette, the Orders of the Privy Council, the Parliamentary Register, the Acts of Parliament, the London Times, other Hamilton King correspondence, John Church Hamilton's writings for missing words, the Dropmore Papers in England, and Miller's treatise. These slides show you what it took us to get there. Some of that's my writing, some of that's Syrett's.